Before we add and subtract fractions, we need to know how to find a common denominator because that's going to be needed when we move on. So you recall from the last video that 1/2 is the same thing as 2/4. We can keep going. That's 3/6. And these are what are called equivalent fractions. And so when we're adding or subtracting fractions, we want to have the same denominator. So how do we find common denominators? So let's say I'm looking at 3/5 and 5/6. And if I want to add these two together, I need a common denominator. 5 and 6 are not the same thing. And so what we need is the lowest common denominator, which is the least common multiple of the denominators. And if you look at these, 5 times 6 is 30. And you might say, hey, well, 30 is the LCD. In this case, you'd be correct. And so to have equivalent fractions with the same denominator, I take 3/5 and multiply it by 6/6. And I'm going to get 18/30. And similarly, 5/6 times 5/5. And that's 25/30. Not all fractions can be worked with that quickly, just by observation. And so we're going to need a technique in order to find least common multiples. And so let's talk about that real quick. So least common multiple is the smallest number that the least common multiple of two numbers would be the smallest number that those two numbers divide evenly. You can extend that. The least common multiple of three numbers will be the smallest number that all three of those numbers divide, and so forth. And you can have any number of numbers you want there. And so I like to say LCM to represent least common multiple. And if you see something like LCM 18 and let's try 12. I want the least common multiple of 18 and 12. So it's the smallest number that 18 will divide evenly and 12 would divide evenly. So it's going to be at least 18 because 18 has to divide it. And there we go. I'll live with that. So one way to go about it is you just list multiples. So 18 times 1 is 18. 18 times 2 is 36. 18 times 3 is 54, and we can keep going. But I know that if I look at 12 times 2 is 24, and 12 times 3 is 36. Hey, wait a minute. I think we have a winner there. 36 is the same number. So I'm listing off multiples, and I want to get the same multiple because it's a common multiple, so 36 works. We can keep going, and 72 shows up, and that would work for both, but that's too big. So the LCM of this would be 36. Well, this method that I use just now works really quickly for 18 and 12, but for other numbers, we might have to list off dozens before we can find anything. And so there's a different way we can look at it. If I have 18, we're going to make this thing called a factor tree. 3 times 6 is 18, and 2 times 3 is 6. If I look at 12, 2 times 6 and 2 times 3. So why am I making factor trees? Well, I know that 18 is 2 times 3 squared, and 12 is 2 squared times 3. And that's what we call prime factorization. And you might remember making these back in the day, and they're useful. And if you're trying to add two fractions together by hand, chances are you're going to need to use this technique to break down your numbers and build the least common denominator, which is least common multiple. So what I'm going to do is I want to take factors from each number, and I want to take the maximum number of factors that it has. So you notice that there's a 2 in common for both. Okay, that's cool. But we have 2 squared in 12. So my least common multiple is going to have a 2 squared. I have a 3 squared in 18 and 3 in 12, well, I'm going to take 3 squared out of the 18. And if one of these numbers had a 5 in it, I'd have to have 5 represented. If it had a 9, well, not 9, but let's see, an 11 represented, I'd have to have that in my least common multiple. We're going to take every single factor that's represented, and basically we're going to take the highest exponent from each one. Well, 4 times 9 is 36, and that gives me my least common multiple. So let's use this to find something a little bit more complicated. Let's look at 7/45 and let's do 7/12. If I want to find equivalent fractions of 7/45 and 7/12, I can make my factor trees. 9 times 5, 3 times 3. And for 12, we did that already. And we know that's 2 times 6 and 2 times 3. And so let's see here, 45 is 3 squared times 5, and 12 is 2 squared times 3. Okay, so there's a few more factors here to work with. So my LCM of 12 and 45 is going to have a 2 squared in it. It's going to have a 3 squared, and it's going to have a 5. And so it's going to be 36 times 5. 36 times 5 is 150. I'm going to double check that. Let's see. Nope. 180. There we go. And yes, we all make mistakes, and it's good to make sure you check. All right, so I have the least common multiple is 180. Now I need to know what to do with that. Well, I'm noticing that 12 is missing a 5. And 45 is missing a 2 squared. And what else is missing? Oh, and 12 is also missing a 3. So I have a 3 squared here, but I only have a 3 here. So, all right. So let's go build our numbers here. So I have 7/45. And so I want to see what's missing from 45. Well, I know I'm missing a 2 squared. So 7/45 times 2 squared over 2 squared. And that's going to get us done with that. Now I get 28 over 180. And 7/12. What are we missing on 7/12? So I said we're missing a 5 and a 5, and we're also missing a 3 and a 3. Okay, so it's going to be 60 times 3 is 180 on the denominator, so that's good. And 35 times 3, 5. So we get 105 1/80 there. Now I have two fractions. They have a common denominator. If I wanted to, I can add those. These are what we call equivalent fractions. And we are going to be using this in the next video to add and subtract fractions.